although they were well paid by the West, we understand that the Kiev regime should have thought about its own legitimacy, because questions are mounting. Probably it would be a right thing for the Kiev regime to think about an anti-constitutional coup in 2014 and the presidential election that didn't happen in March, as well as the current status of Zelensky. What can you say on this account? Or if they put Chevron on the guard, then they can do anything, right? By the way, the Wall Street Journal, the US newspaper, has a different opinion. On May 4th, there was a publication, and you can hardly suspect that this magazine has a Russian tilt. It talks about the Ukrainian default, and this is quite real if Kyiv does not resume paying the debt for foreign creditors. And nobody speaks about the fact that Ukraine, using this current Ukrainian Western mentorship and given the split of Ukrainian society, nobody says that it can restore its economic positions on all tracks. Nobody is speaking about that. Come to think of it, the American journalists are asking themselves questions. Can Ukraine pay the debt to service its loans? That's what we're talking about. We're talking about a deal provided by Western investment funds that expect to get at least an interest in exchange for the writing off of a debt on Ukrainian bonds worth, mind you, 20 billion USD. Imagine the scale of deception of Western audience, initially using taxes, using payments and political toolkit. Ukraine was funded, and they promised that Ukraine will pay this off, and turns out that it will not pay this off, namely 20 billion USD. The creditors include BlackRock and PIMCO. If the deal is not concluded, then in August, when there will be an end of delay for servicing the state debt, Ukraine can go bankrupt. The Wall Street Journal also states that Kiev might spend means that are allocated as kind of an assistance to it. We're talking about global shenanigans, not of global scale, but of a historical global scale. Probably the universe cannot recall anything of this kind.
So Ukraine, I mean, of course, the Kiev regime, the structure on Bankova. It's just a colossal global laundering structure for tens of and hundreds of billions of dollars that whose purpose is not actually known and whose destination is unknown. So it's a concern for the so-called business sharks. The Ukrainian economy is doing so badly that it is doomed to fall into a deep coma without Western support, without external support. And they have already spent all the available funds for assistance to the so-called Ukrainian democracy. The European Commission's foreign policy spokesman on the 6th of May made a statement about Ukraine's alleged right to attack the Crimean Bridge. It was underlined self-defense. It should be called only direct coercion to terrorism. And it's about a statement, not of some representative of some marginal political party or extremist movement. It's about a European official who is talking from the entire European Union in general, who is doing his job, and the European Union is not just a sponsor of the Kiev regime, but instigating by its statement, instigating Kiev to attack peaceful Russian cities, civilian infrastructure, including hospitals, schools, shops. Together with the shipments of heavy weapons and long-range weapons, the EU officials ignore their own international commitments by facilitating the actions of Ukrainian neo-Nazis. Josep Borrell, the head of European diplomacy, explicitly recognized that the Ukrainian conflict has a quick, peaceful solution. And personally, himself and the European Union, represented by him, really do not want the cessation of hostilities. And citing Borrell and other European officials, we have noted the long-term investments by the European Union financing arms supplies to Ukraine in order to prolong the armed conflict. And that's another confirmation of the terrible reality. Ordinary Ukrainians are just a tool that Zelensky sold to the EU. And they are being used to settle geopolitical scores between the West and our country regarding forced mobilization. Just not possible to mention another horror of the Ukrainian draft. They are ready to slaughter anyone, sick or healthy. It's not important for them. For Ukrainian criminals, they just need to prolong this agony, this dance with death, in order somewhere to profit, somewhere to prolong their own fate. They cannot be avoided. Somewhere to cover the corruption schemes, also taking into account the coming election in the United States of America and the corruption of the Biden family that is tied to Kiev. We do not doubt that the EU does not care about the fate of Russians or Ukrainians or anyone else. Just Borrell's statements that they live in a beautiful garden and the rest are wild jungle. It's just a proof of anything. It's just parasitization of the West on the resources of other countries. The superiority of the golden billion over the peoples of the global South and East. The globalist and neo-colonialist thinking of the European Union in developing its foreign policy and domestic policy as well. All the mentioned facts are just other contours underlining the relevance of the special military operation to denazify and demilitarize Ukraine and eliminate the threats emanating from its territory. As stated by the Russian officials, they will all be fulfilled. We have many questions on the so-called Meritorious Peacemaker website. I would remind it's an extremist internet resource. I would like to remind that we have many times drawn attention of human rights structures, international structures, on the publications on the American service and the internet resource where the data of public figures, journalists, and now even children is published. Why is it published? It's just a plan to destroy the mentioned people. When a certain journalist, publicist, or public figure is killed during a terror attack or direct some murder And they have put a mark that the order has been fulfilled. It's just a database of the criminal Kiev regime that, from the point of view of Bankova and the American sponsors who are subject to being physically destroyed, being killed. And there are photos of those victims, and they put marks when they are eliminated, when they are killed. On the 6th of May, the Kiev regime committed an attack against Zakhar Le Pen. As a result, his comrade Alexander Shubin was killed, and Zakhar Le Pen himself was seriously wounded. They were both in the Peacemaker database. They appeared on the site back in 2014. The list of persons, direct quote, threatening the national security of Ukraine, end of quote, was included in 2018. And all this time his life was under a constant threat. The hunt for dissenters undesirable to the Kiev authorities is conducted purposefully. For example, Semyon Yeroman was killed, a correspondent of the Izvestia, and his data had also been posted on that terrorist website. And the mechanisms aimed at the Peacemaker websites are a vivid testimony of the hypocrisy and destroying some standards, any standards that are applicable to those who call themselves a democracy. And it's just the understanding of the false nature of the Western ideas, what they, with regard to the journalist's right. In an interview to the British media, The Economist, President Macron declared that if Russian troops break through the front line and the Ukrainian side makes a corresponding request, it will be necessary to raise a question of sending Western troops to the region. We have many times commented on the French leader's provocative rhetoric. He has made many similar statements, and Macron himself explains that as a desire to create a certain strategic uncertainty for Russia. But we have to disappoint him. For us, the situation looks more than certain. If the French appear in the conflict zone, they will inevitably become targets for the Russian armed forces. We have already proof of the involvement of Paris. His statements are not only rejected by his EU and NATO allies, but the overwhelming majority of French citizens. They have become themselves victims of this strategic uncertainty. It's actually difficult to understand what he means. So the French citizens now become direct victims in a direct sense of this word. I would repeat, the data on the French killed in the conflict zone, and maybe not even took part, but commanded the Ukrainian army forces, made some advice, gave some instructions. There is even more evidence of that. But Macron does not seem to be confused with that. That's what the true democracy should look like, in his opinion. It's about the manipulation by official Paris of some Russian military threat, and the desire to justify the multi-billion-dollar expenses on the Western hybrid war against Russia. And the French just thought that it should be conquered, it should be taken. And the Russian servicemen were on the territory of France only when they were fighting the aggressor, and to force the aggressor back to his own country. And Macron is not original in his statements, unfortunately. It's difficult to understand for the French citizens, for other countries' citizens, that the recklessness of the political elites of France, as they are parting with their own military, political, and even intellectual sovereignty. Yes, there were shameful events in French history, but there were great events as well. Those of French resistance and the stance of its leaders in the second half of the Second World War. These are great pages of history, and we should look upon that and not some shameful events in the French history that also took place and that are also not forgotten by us. But this issue also has a pragmatic side to that. It's just pure pragmatic. When not only European security is destroyed, but the security of France itself is also destroyed. And many, just a lot of comments of the British officials when the British and French ambassadors were summoned. And there is also one statement that should be commented on, accusations against alleged arson on the outskirts of London by our country. It's just some petty crime in accordance to them. Those used to be chemical weapons, but now we're just setting fire to some warehouses. Something has been broken in London, it seems. It's about the information war against our country by Downing Street. Through the media, such events are used by the British officials to attribute their own pathetic, those are pathetic attempts to attribute their own political miscalculations to Russia. Now the Conservative Party, its ratings are decreasing, and more voters realize that the social and economic turmoil in the country is caused by the current authorities. It's even to the detriment of their own national interests, to their own financial welfare. Those accusations are actually unsubstantiated, as they always are. These are allegations of a certain connection with the Russian states. They are not supported by any facts. You remember highly likely and Britain having a certain table where highly likely occupies, I think, the 7th line. They have some their own definition of probability. It's difficult to say which level of probability, possibility is the participation of Russia in the arson of some warehouses, but it's just disinformation. We call upon London to end this anti-Russian hysteria, and Russia does not support diversions, acts of sabotage against civilian objects, and is ready to discuss any concerns in a substantive manner. However, the British side has rejected such proposals within the last decades. So if London has official materials on that account, so they must have invented something. It would be not bad to pass that to the Russian embassy. Moldova, we continue to follow the situation in that country, and the celebrations of the victory in the Second World War and the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Moldova from the Nazi invaders. It's actually horrible. We usually speak about the victims, about people who actually died or were wounded. It's just about moral victims. I do not know what is more horrible, but it's actually horrible. During her election campaign in 2020, Maria Sandu promised that the voters will be able to celebrate holidays, including the 9th of May. It's just a public holiday that has existed for decades, confirmed from the point of view of moral ideas, historical truth by the Nuremberg Tribunal, the UN General Assembly, that is making statements on that, has made a lot of statements. When Moldova left the Soviet Union, and after that, and even now, it is enshrined as the right of the Moldovan citizens. For that right, many people, so many people were killed that attribute themselves to Moldovans, to Moldova during the Second World War. And back then, during her election campaign, she allowed them that if she would be elected, people also, among other things, would be able to celebrate the 9th of May. And she said, it's a quote, "It's your right and no one can take it away from you," end of quote. I have a feeling that maybe it's just a blatant lie, and it's just impossible to forget your words that were 2 or 3 years ago. In 2023, the Moldovan authorities tried to shift the Victory Day celebrations to the 8th of May, and they tried to rename this holiday. You know how they wanted to call that? The Day of Reconciliation in memory of the fallen during the Second World War.
She can even remember Hitler supporters here. That's what they do. As Moldovan observers noted, the authorities needed it not to impede the celebration of the Europe Day that is also celebrated on May 9th in Moldova. Today, the Moldovan activists are openly saying that the leadership of the country is doing its utmost in order to stand in the way of the May 9th celebrations. And this is happening in Moldova that did a lot for the victory, as well as the citizens of this republic. These people are ethnic Moldovans, and they were living in other regions of the Soviet Union. This region gave so much so that we could ensure the common victory. Nobody divided this victory. And right now, the Western puppet that came to power using Western money, together with the EU mission in Moldova, launched an information campaign calling the citizens of Moldova to come to the streets on May 9th to celebrate the Europe Day. They expect high guests from Brussels, and as a result, the organizers of the Victory Day had to change the routes for the Immortal Regiment. At the same time, they honor the Romanian soldiers that were fighting on the side of Hitler Germany. On April 20th, the Monumentum Association, that is well known for its monuments to Nazi henchmen, opened just think of it, the mausoleum of Romanian army, to honor, and it's difficult for me to say that because it should all go in brackets, to honor over 100 of Romanian heroes that died for the liberation of Chisinau in July 1941. You know what? It should be described not as a crime against historical truth or rewriting of history of its own people. This should be described as a national treason. On April 28th, in the settlement of Miklos, monuments to the tombs, they have been doing great information and political efforts. Naturally, they have been doing their duties. They include this topic in their negotiations, in their contacts with colleagues from foreign countries. And certainly we will get back to this topic in more detail. As it was announced during the previous briefing, these days the Foreign Ministry leadership participates in memorable events in the Foreign Ministry of Russia at the Smolensk Square. Let me start with the topical international agenda. A few words on the events within BRICS. Given our chairship in this format, Russian chairship is gaining momentum. Over 40 events have already been conducted at various levels on 3 pillars of cooperation: political and security, economic and finance, cultural and humanitarian contacts. Within the political track, there's been a number of sectoral meetings, including the BRICS Council session on combating money laundering and financing of terrorism, anti-corruption working group, the working group on security and the use of ICTs. On April 11th and 12th, Moscow hosted the meeting of committee chairs on international affairs of the BRICS parliaments. It was very useful to compare notes on main areas of interparliamentary interaction and the preparation for the 10th BRICS Parliamentary Forum. On April 24th and 25th, there were consultations between deputy foreign ministers on the Middle East and North Africa, with a special focus on the situation in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The participants exchanged views on ways to normalize the situation and comprehensively settle crises in Syria, Lebanon, Sudan, Libya, Yemen. On the economic track, there has been discussion of sustainable development, supporting multilateral trade system, confronting unilateral trade restrictions in financial area. There were opportunities considered to create financial tools and mechanisms for mutual settlements that are not controlled by third countries, increasing the share of national currencies during trade and investment transactions. These issues were discussed at the first finance ministers meeting of BRICS countries on February 27th this year on the sidelines of G20 events in São Paulo. At the session of the Senior Officials Committee of BRICS on Energy that took place on February 26th and 27th, initiatives were presented on energy security, technological cooperation, including exchange of best practices to reduce CO2 emissions. Platform for energy research of BRICS was also discussed in early April. There was the first session of BRICS Contact Group on Climate and Sustainable Development. It was initiated by Russia. The focus is a just transition to low-carbon economy, adjustment to climate change, and other issues that have to do with this global issue. At the working group session on agriculture that took place on April 16th and 17th, Russian agencies presented an initiative to establish a platform on grain trade. It seeks to ensure food security of BRICS and of developing countries in general, and certainly special attention is paid to strengthening BRICS partnership in healthcare. On February 13th, Moscow hosted the first session of the BRICS Working Group on Nuclear Medicine. On March 27th, there was a session of experts to launch a comprehensive early warning system for infectious diseases. On February 15th, there was a training of crisis situation services of BRICS countries to exchange prompt information during emergency situations. On February 27th, there was a session of the working group on the agreement between space agencies. It had to do with cooperation with remote sensing satellite group of BRICS countries. Traditionally, BRICS pay special attention to humanitarian track. On April 23rd, Moscow saw the end of the BRICS Cinema Festival. Movies from Egypt, India, Iran, China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, and South Africa were presented, as well as other movies that were presented out of contest. Russian chairship is entering its decisive stage. We are preparing for the ministerial. It will take place on June 10th and 11th in Nizhny Novgorod. On the sidelines of St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, there will be a meeting of transport ministers as well as health ministers and trade chambers. There were meetings planned between space agency leaders and the International Conference of Russian Healthcare Ministry on Sustainable to Antimicrobe Medicine and the Academic Forum, the Festival for Theatrical Schools of BRICS countries, and the bright sporting events will take place in Kazan. There will be BRICS Games from June 11th to 24th this year. There will be a competition in 30 sports, and we expect delegations from over 60 countries. We hope that with the active support of partners, Russian chairship will be marked by significant practical results and will strengthen the BRICS contribution in the international arena. As you have noted, we will take preliminary stock of the events that are taking place. They are numerous. We will keep you abreast on a daily basis promptly, and we'll also make these reviews. Let's get down to the situation around Ukraine. The Kyiv regime keeps on its terrorist activities against the civilians and civil infrastructure of Russia. For the Bandera supporters, and it is obvious not only for us but for a growing number of countries, of NGOs, and even people, nothing is sacred for them. Even during the Holy Easter celebrations for Catholics and for Orthodox people, they continued to shell citizens of Russian regions. From May 3rd to 6th, the armed forces of Ukraine bombed houses in Donetsk, Gorlovka, Yasinovat, and Avdiivka. Drone attacks and explosive devices wounded 7 persons. On May the 5th, in Nikolaevka, a mine of Ukrainian armed forces wounded a family in a car. Adults were seriously wounded, and the child, fortunately, was left intact. Near the Ugledar, the armed forces of Ukraine used drones to attack the cross procession, and miraculously, there were no victims. In the Shebekino region of the Belgorod Oblast, the drone attack the settlement of Murom in Berdyansk. The Ukrainian terrorists blew up a car, claiming the life of a Russian penitentiary system staff. In the Belgorod region, over the past days, there were 2 terrorist attacks. On May 3rd, a drone attacked a bus carrying staff of one of local enterprises. 1 passenger was injured. On May 7th, in the settlement of Berezovka, a drone targeted a car and 2 minivans. It claimed 47 persons and 42 were wounded. This includes 3 minor brothers. After medical staff came on site, as well as police and first responders, and journalists came. And after that, the armed forces of Ukraine used their terrorist practice. They made another strike despite the lack of international response to the atrocities. And I would say it in a different way. Although these unfriendly states encourage the terrorist attacks, the Russian law enforcers carefully record the crimes of Ukrainian neo-Nazis. Those responsible will be brought to justice, and let me specifically delve on that. Courts of Russia, building upon evidence collected by the Investigative Committee of Russia, continues to issue verdicts against Ukrainian fighters. The Southern District Military Court sentenced one person, Plahotnik, to 18 years. None of Ukrainian criminals will avoid punishment. They will be identified and they will be brought to justice, and we will keep you abreast regarding their crimes as well as punishments that you cannot avoid. We talked a lot about the crimes of the Kiev regime during the Easter celebration that targeted monasteries and churches, and let me specifically talk about that, because we're not talking about some targeted attacks that are unholy, that are detached from the general politics, and these people decided to commit this blasphemy. Far from it, the tone was set by Zelensky. On May the 5th, he addressed his population to mark the Holy Easter, and he went as far as saying that the God has a chevron with the Ukrainian flag. What kind of God are we talking about? He needs to keep on explaining who he believes in. It's not a sarcastic question, a question out of curiosity, since he listed himself in various congregations or social groups. He was seen in Orthodox churches as well as in shrines of Jewish people. He repeatedly stated that. What does it mean? Does it mean that he's an atheist who simply is tolerant to religious groups? Then he's not entitled to talk about God. If he speaks about God, or if he participates in some kind of events that have to do with religious groups, then it would be the right thing to do to make up his mind, because otherwise we're talking about deception of people. On the other hand, hardly anyone believes him. But such statements that he makes shows that he has this fake nature. If we take dogmas of Christianity, this is pure blasphemy. Probably he doesn't know about that. But once again, he appeared in various Orthodox churches. He made so many statements on this topic, and probably those who consult him on religious issues are not quite aware of that. If he speaks about God, and if he says that God has these chevrons, at the same time, the authorities in Kiev continue to persecute Orthodox Canonical Church. They arrest unfavored priests. They torture the congregation, the believers of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and they have made quite a success here, unfortunately. A few words on the Easter in Ukraine. The video with Zelensky in Vyshyvanka clothing that harnessed his sacrilege skills was broadcast by Kiev propaganda, and at the same time Ukrainian users shared other videos. These videos, the schismatics of the so-called Orthodox Church of Ukraine turned this bright holiday of Easter into the Walpurgis night. During the Easter celebrations, they chanted Bandera slogans and banished believers of the canonical church. However, neither violence nor threats affected the congregation. The overwhelming majority of Ukrainians remain faithful to their belief, to their church, and they responded with many kilometers of lines of queues to the churches of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. As for the schismatics, well, they are not schismatics. They are the destroyers of the Christian faith in Ukraine, and nobody came to them. Incidentally, the same happened in Western Europe, in North America. Ukrainian believers refused to hear human hatred sermons in schismatic congregation, and they visit the churches of canonical orthodoxy. This tells you a thing or two about a fake agenda. On May the 6th, the Foreign Ministry of Ukraine made a statement regarding the inauguration of Russian president, which was detached from reality. There was nothing new. There were notorious far-fetched accusations of Russia, of aggression and dictatorship, and the main message is to doubt the legitimacy and democratic election of President Putin. This is yet another attempt to interfere in our domestic affairs, and it is made by the West using the Kiev regime. Before making such assessments, although they were well paid by the West, we understand that the Kiev regime should have thought about its own legitimacy, because questions are mounting. Probably it would be a right thing for the Kiev regime to think about an anti-constitutional coup in 2014 and the presidential election that didn't happen in March, as well as the current status of Zelensky. What can you say on this account? Or if they put Chevron on the guard, then they can do anything, right? By the way, the Wall Street Journal, the U.S. newspaper, has a different opinion. On May 4th, there was a publication, and you can hardly suspect that this magazine has a Russian tilt. It talks about the Ukrainian default, and this is quite real if Kiev does not resume paying the debt for foreign creditors. And nobody speaks about the fact that Ukraine, using this current Ukrainian Western mentorship and given the split of Ukrainian society, nobody says that it can restore its economic positions on all tracks. Nobody is speaking about that. Come to think of it, the American journalists are asking themselves questions. Can Ukraine pay the debt to service its loans? That's what we're talking about. We're talking about a deal provided by Western investment funds that expect to get at least an interest in exchange for the writing off of a debt on Ukrainian bonds worth, mind you, 20 billion USD. Imagine the scale of deception of Western audience, initially using taxes, using payments and political toolkit. Ukraine was funded, and they promised that Ukraine will pay this off, and turns out that it will not pay this off, namely 20 billion USD. The creditors include BlackRock and PIMCO. If the deal is not concluded, then in August, when there will be an end of delay for servicing the state debt, Ukraine can go bankrupt. The Wall Street Journal also states that Kiev might spend means that are allocated as kind of an assistance to it. We're talking about global shenanigans, not of global scale, but of a historical global scale. Probably the universe cannot recall anything of this kind.
So Ukraine, I mean, of course, the Kiev regime, the structure on Bankova. It's just a colossal global laundering structure for tens of and hundreds of billions of dollars that whose purpose is not actually known and whose destination is unknown. So it's a concern for the so-called business sharks. The Ukrainian economy is doing so badly that it is doomed to fall into a deep coma without Western support, without external support. And they have already spent all the available funds for assistance to the so-called Ukrainian democracy. The European Commission's foreign policy spokesman on the 6th of May made a statement about Ukraine's alleged right to attack the Crimean Bridge. In it was underlined self-defense. It should be called only direct coercion to terrorism. And it's about a statement, not of some representative of some marginal political party or extremist movement. It's about a European official who is talking from the entire European Union in general, who is doing his job, and the European Union is not just a sponsor of the Kiev regime, but instigating by its statement, instigating Kiev to attack peaceful Russian cities, civilian infrastructure, including hospitals, schools, shops. Together with the shipments of heavy weapons and long-range weapons, the EU officials ignore their own international commitments by facilitating the actions of Ukrainian neo-Nazis. Josep Borrell, the head of European Diplomacy, explicitly recognized that the Ukrainian conflict has a quick, peaceful solution. And personally, himself and the European Union, represented by him, really do not want the cessation of hostilities. And citing Borrell and other European officials, we have noted the long-term investments by the European Union financing arms supplies to Ukraine in order to prolong the armed conflict. And that's another confirmation of the terrible reality. Ordinary Ukrainians are just a tool that Zelensky sold to the EU. And they are being used to settle geopolitical scores between the West and our country regarding forced mobilization. Just not possible to mention another horror of the Ukrainian draft. They are ready to slaughter anyone, sick or healthy. It's not important for them, for Ukrainian criminals. They just need to prolong this agony, this dance with death, in order somewhere to profit, somewhere to prolong their own fate. They cannot be avoided. Somewhere to cover the corruption schemes, also taking into account the coming election in the United States of America and the corruption of the Biden family that is tied to Kiev. We do not doubt that the EU does not care about the fate of Russians or Ukrainians or anyone else. Just barren statements that they live in a beautiful garden and the rest are wild jungle. It's just a proof of anything. It's just parasitization of the West on the resources of other countries. The superiority of the golden billion over the peoples of the global South and East. The globalist neo-colonialist thinking of the European Union in developing its foreign policy and domestic policy as well. All the mentioned facts are just other contours underlining the relevance of the special military operation to denazify and demilitarize Ukraine and eliminate the threats emanating from its territory. As stated by the Russian officials, they will all be fulfilled. We have many questions on the so-called Meritorious Peacemaker website. I would remind it's an extremist internet resource. I would like to remind that we have many times drawn attention of human rights structures, international structures, on the publications on the American service and the internet resource where the data of public figures, journalists and now even children is published. Why is it published? It's just a plan to destroy the mentioned people. When a certain journalist, publicist or public figure is killed during a terror attack or direct some murder, and they have put a mark that the order has been fulfilled. It's just a database of the criminal Kiev regime that from the point of view of Bankova and the American sponsors who are subject to being physically destroyed, being killed. And there are photos of those victims, and they put marks when they are eliminated, when they are killed. On the 6th of May, the Kiev regime committed an attack against Zakhar Lepin. As a result, his comrade Alexander Shubin was killed, and Zakhar Lepin himself was seriously wounded. They were both in the Peacemaker database. They appeared on the site back in 2014. The list of persons, direct quote, threatening the national security of Ukraine, end of quote, was included in 2018. And all this time his life was under a constant threat. The hunt for dissenters undesirable to the Kiev authorities is conducted purposefully. For example, Semyon Yeroman was killed, a correspondent of the Izvestia, and his data had also been posted on that terrorist website. And the mechanisms aimed at the Peacemaker websites are a vivid testimony of the hypocrisy and destroying some standards, any standards that are applicable to those who call themselves a democracy. And it's just the understanding of the false nature of the Western ideas, what they, with regard to the journalist's right. In an interview to the British media, The Economist, President Macron declared that if Russian troops break through the front line and the Ukrainian side makes a corresponding request, it will be necessary to raise a question of sending Western troops to the region. We have many times commented on the French leader's provocative rhetoric. He has made many similar statements, and Macron himself explains that as a desire to create a certain strategic uncertainty for Russia. But we have to disappoint him. For us, the situation looks more than certain. If the French appear in the conflict zone, they will inevitably become targets for the Russian armed forces. We have already proof of the involvement of Paris. His statements are not only rejected by his EU and NATO allies, but the overwhelming majority of French citizens. They have become themselves victims of this strategic uncertainty. It's actually difficult to understand what he means. So the French citizens now become direct victims in a direct sense of this word. I would repeat the data on the French killed in the conflict zone, and maybe not even took part but commanded the Ukrainian army forces, made some advice, gave some instructions. There is even more evidence of that. But Macron does not seem to be confused with that. That's what the true democracy should look like, in his opinion. It's about the manipulation by official Paris of some Russian military threat, and the desire to justify the multi-billion-dollar expenses on the Western hybrid war against Russia. And the French just thought that it should be conquered, it should be taken, and the Russian servicemen were on the territory of France only when they were fighting the aggressor, and to force the aggressor back to his own country. And Macron is not original in his statements, unfortunately. It's difficult to understand for the French citizens, for other countries' citizens, that the recklessness of the political elites of France, as they are parting with their own military, political, and even intellectual sovereignty. Yes, there were shameful events in French history, but there were great events as well. Those of French resistance and the stance of its leaders in the second half of the Second World War. These are great pages of history, and we should look upon that and not some shameful events in the French history that also took place and that are also not forgotten by us. But this issue also has a pragmatic side to that. It's just pure pragmatic. When not only European security is destroyed, but the security of France itself is also destroyed. And many, just a lot of comments of the British officials when the British and French ambassadors were summoned. And there is also one statement that should be commented on, accusations against alleged arson on the outskirts of London by our country. It's just some petty crime in accordance to them. Those used to be chemical weapons, but now we're just setting fire to some warehouses. Something has been broken in London, it seems. It's about the information war against our country by Downing Street. Through the media, such events are used by the British officials to attribute their own pathetic, those are pathetic attempts to attribute their own political miscalculations to Russia. Now the Conservative Party, its ratings are decreasing, and more voters realize that the social and economic turmoil in the country is caused by the current authorities. It's even to the detriment of their own national interests, to their own financial welfare. Those accusations are actually unsubstantiated, as they always are. These are allegations of a certain connection with the Russian states. They are not supported by any facts. You remember highly likely and Britain having a certain table where highly likely occupies, I think, the 7th line. They have some their own definition of probability. It's difficult to say which level of probability, possibility is the participation of Russia in the arson of some warehouses, but it's just disinformation. We call upon London to end this anti-Russian hysteria, and Russia does not support diversions, acts of sabotage against civilian objects, and is ready to discuss any concerns in a substantive manner. However, the British side has rejected such proposals within the last decades. So if London has official materials on that account, so they must have invented something. It would be not bad to pass that to the Russian embassy. Moldova, we continue to follow the situation in that country, and the celebrations of the victory in the Second World War and the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Moldova from the Nazi invaders. It's actually horrible. We usually speak about the victims, about people who actually died or were wounded. It's just about moral victims. I do not know what is more horrible, but it's actually horrible. During her election campaign in 2020, Maria Zakharova promised that the voters will be able to celebrate holidays, including the 9th of May. It's just a public holiday that has existed for decades, confirmed from the point of view of moral ideas, historical truth by the Nuremberg Tribunal, the UN General Assembly, that is making statements on that, has made a lot of statements. When Moldova left the Soviet Union, and after that, and even now, it is enshrined as the right of the Moldovan citizens. For that right, many people, so many people were killed that attribute themselves to Moldovans, to Moldova during the Second World War. And back then, during her election campaign, she allowed them that if she would be elected, people also, among other things, would be able to celebrate the 9th of May. And she said, it's a quote, "It's your right and no one can take it away from you," end of quote. I have a feeling that maybe it's just a blatant lie, and it's just impossible to forget your words that were 2 or 3 years ago. In 2023, the Moldovan authorities tried to shift the Victory Day celebrations to the 8th of May, And they tried to rename this holiday. You know how they wanted to call that? The Day of Reconciliation in memory of the fallen during the Second World War.
She can even remember Hitler supporters here. That's what they do. As Moldovan observers noted, the authorities needed it not to impede the celebration of the Europe Day that is also celebrated on May 9th in Moldova. Today, the Moldovan activists are openly saying that the leadership of the country is doing its utmost in order to stand in the way of the May 9th celebrations. And this is happening in Moldova that did a lot for the victory, as well as the citizens of this republic. These people are ethnic Moldovans, and they were living in other regions of the Soviet Union. This region gave so much so that we could ensure the common victory. Nobody divided this victory. And right now, the Western puppet that came to power using Western money, together with the EU mission in Moldova, launched an information campaign calling the citizens of Moldova to come to the streets on May 9th to celebrate the Europe Day. They expect high guests from Brussels, and as a result, the organizers of the Victory Day had to change the routes for the Myrtle Regiment. At the same time, they honor the Romanian soldiers that were fighting on the side of Hitler Germany. On April 20th, the Monumentum Association, that is well known for its monuments to Nazi henchmen, opened, just think of it, the mausoleum of Romanian army to honor, and it's difficult for me to say that because it should all go in brackets, to honor over 100 of Romanian heroes that died for the liberation of Chisinau in July 1941. You know what? It should be described not as a crime against historical truth or rewriting of history of its own people. This should be described as a national treason. On April 28th, in the settlement of Mikloșeni, there was the ceremony of remembrance for Romanian soldiers that died on the front lines of 2 world wars. At the same time, the Moldovan surge officers were denied of reburying Soviet warriors. On May 7th, radical nationalists published a video where they humiliated those who lived in Bubec settlement. They called to dismantle the Soviet monument. This monument was erected, and according to the current authorities, rather a regime, it should be destroyed. And you know what? What was the response of Moldovan authorities? Would they condemn the current rhetoric, let alone legal aspects? There was no feedback, no response whatsoever, despite attempts of the Chisinau regime to put to oblivion the feat of their predecessors. The latest social opinion polls state that the majority of citizens will celebrate May 9th. There will be the Immortal Regiment, there will be mass rallies and wreath-laying ceremonies to the memorials of those who contributed to the defeat of fascism. According to organizers, Chisinau will have the biggest banner of victory in the world. And all these attempts of the Nazi revenge in Moldova are doomed to failure. By the way, since we're talking about the West double standards and lawlessness. A few words on terrorist attacks and investigation, the international law and the absence of it. A few words on terrorist attacks at Nord Stream 1 and 2 and the investigation that should have been going on, but it is not going on. In February, Danish and Swedish authorities decided to end the investigation of the diversions at Nord Stream 1 and 2. And this confirms that those countries are not interested in identifying the perpetrators of terrorist attacks. Of course, this evidence should have been needed by law enforcers, and that is something that our country has been doing. But we are following the rhetorics of Western countries around energy policy of Europe, of our country. What do you need to understand who was behind this attack? Who was capitalizing on suspending the sustainable economic cooperation between Western Europe and the Russian Federation? From the very beginning, Copenhagen and Stockholm refused any interaction with Russia on investigation. They impeded the launch of the international investigation under the United Nations auspices. And that is also telling. Okay, they said this is about Russia and they do not want to have anything in common with Russia, and currently they stopped the investigation. We have nothing to do with that. It was about their own domestic investigation. That means that they do not want to have anything to do with the truth, right? In October 2022, the head of the Russian government, Mishustin, sent a request to Denmark and Sweden, but it was not responded. There were also requests by the Prosecutor General's Office of Russia, but they were denied. They claimed that they suspended national investigation without providing any results of the investigation to the Russian side. Hence the question, has there been any investigation? We get an impression that authorities of Denmark and Sweden know for sure who orchestrated this terrorist attack, and they simply decided to get away from that. Or they are facing such an enormous political pressure that they understand that for them it is the question of life and death. The Russian Foreign Ministry will continue to seek an unpoliticized investigation of diversions using Russian authorities and Gazprom. Despite the artificial impediments, such a terrorist attack is a serious precedent. It is a threat to regional and global energy security. It demands collective response of global community. We take note that given the volume of gas export via Nord Stream 1 and 2, our country is an affected country, and we hope that the parties of interest would review their position. They will abandon unnecessary politicization, and they will opt for cooperation. I would like to once again draw your attention to the constant fight that lawyers and family members of General Ratko Mladic are doing for his life and health. Despite the data that his health conditions are deteriorating, the international mechanism continues to neglect its basic rights, including the right for appropriate medical assistance. We're talking about many years of not providing proper medical records on his health conditions and refusing requests to provide temporary liberation for humanitarian grounds. Although Serbia was ready to accommodate him, this shows that the mechanism seeks to make the most damage to Serbs. The collective West claimed that they are the ones who are responsible in the civil war in the territory of former Yugoslavia. It continues to punish them for their independence. And by the way, the ones who experimented on living humans, black transplantologists who were acting not just in Kosovo, but in the interests of Western hospitals, Western financial entities who benefited from that. The political establishment of the West that wanted to have these human organs, and they were not brought to justice, they were not punished, but they were covered up by all the opportunities of a Western political machine. We once again call the mechanism to liberate Latko Mladic for humanitarian concerns, and we recall that this institution bears full responsibility for his deteriorating health conditions. Well, a few words on the Middle East settlement. That's what I wanted to say. Unfortunately, I cannot say that given what is happening there. It is far from being a settlement. That is why I'm talking about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The prospects for settling the situation in the Gaza Strip and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in general are nowhere to be seen. The situation is aggravating on a daily basis with dire humanitarian repercussions for the civilians population. This is a humanitarian tragedy, disaster with disastrous statistics. On top of that, it is unparalleled in modern history. Come to think of it, as a result of the Israeli military operation since October 2023, 35,000 Palestinians were killed in Gaza, many of which are women and children. We're talking about civilians first and foremost. And certainly, when we say 35,000 people that were killed, we have no right to forget about dozens of thousands of wounded. These are not simple bruises or psychological trauma. We're talking about severe injuries that lead to disability, depriving persons of any normal life. Civilian infrastructure has been virtually completely damaged. The situation is aggravated due to the lack of humanitarian assistance. As a result, the significant part of Gaza population, according to UN agencies, namely the World Food Programme, is on the brink of famine. And the most blasphemous part is that there has been bullying of Palestinians in the information space, stating that, well, what kind of famine are we talking about since people are sunbathing on the beaches? This is inhumane treatment. An additional destabilizing factor is the launch of the Israeli operation in Rafah in southern Gaza, which is home to 1.5 million Palestinian civilians. We demand that the international humanitarian law be observed. Many rounds of negotiations between Israel and Hamas through mediators on the exchange of Israelis, POWs and Palestinian POWs led to no result. Let me also note that Russia also takes an active effort to liberate those Russians detained in Gaza. The current situation confirms our position that it is necessary to start bringing about conditions to establish a direct dialogue between Palestinians and Israelis on the whole range of issues of the final status. And this process should result in implementing the two-state solution that was endorsed between the international community, namely to establish Israel and Palestine in the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital, coexisting in peace and security. That is the focus of our effort in the UNSC, Russian initiative on consolidating approaches of key foreign stakeholders to the Middle East settlement, and our efforts to restore the Palestinian national unity, building upon the PLO platform. We are ready to interact with regional and international stakeholders on this basis. The current aggravation in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict shows the tragic consequences of attempts to monopolize mediation and ungrounded ambitions to address all global issues on its own. And a few words on humanitarian assistance. We are doing our utmost to alleviate the plight of civilians in the Gaza Strip. Starting from October 19th, 2024, the Russian AMICOM sent flights to Egypt to provide 539 tons of humanitarian cargo. This is a large-scale tragedy, and I'm saying that simply not to repeat something that is an ultimate truth. That is a humanitarian disaster. The suffering of civilians in Gaza did not leave us indifferent. Together with state authorities, many Russian NGOs got on board, as well as individuals. At the same time, our country, for a decade, has been having its humanitarian campaigns, and it has doing its utmost so that people could survive in former southeastern Ukraine. Currently, we're talking about our regions, and our country is gathering humanitarian assistance to those in need due to the developments around Ukraine. And we believe that it is not only possible but necessary to provide assistance to the citizens of Gaza. Thanks to the efforts of our citizens and NGOs, public entities, hundreds of tons of medicine, warm clothes, tents, food, and essentials were collected, and this is an ongoing effort. Now, on humanitarian cooperation, on April 19th, Italy inaugurated the Russian pavilion in the Venice Biennale. In line with the arrangements between Moscow and La Paz, this pavilion was provided to the state of Bolivia, and hence in the recently revamped exhibition hall. And let me remind you that it was designed by Russian architect Alexei Shusev in early 20th century. So this pavilion, from April 20th to November 24th, this pavilion will exhibit the works of 25 artists from Bolivia and other countries of Latin America. They have the same common topic, looking to the future. We're moving forward. During the inauguration, officials from Bolivia expressed appreciation to Russia for this friendly step. They highlighted our respect to cultural diversity of other countries and peoples. They praised cooperation with Russia during the preparation of this exhibition. This is another example of fruitful cooperation between Russia and countries of global majority, and it shows sincere commitment of our country to cultural diversity, the respect to indigenous art of Latin America and the Caribbean. We seek to further gradually develop versatile cooperation with Latin American countries and the Caribbean, facilitating their role in international affairs, including in culture, against the backdrop of the emerging multipolarity. Today, May the 8th, marks 80 years of the diplomatic relations between Russia and Costa Rica. Well, this is a tangible date. However, the first contacts were established way before that, back in 1872. Russian Emperor Alexander II and Costa Rica President Tomas Guardia Gutierrez exchanged messages, and this set the beginning for our bilateral ties. This was the step that allowed us to establish the solid ties of friendship and mutual understanding, set the foundation for fruitful trade and economic and cultural humanitarian cooperation, as well as interaction in the international arena. We value the wealth of bilateral relations established between our citizens, and we're ready to further develop them, building upon mutual respect, sovereign equality of states, and other founding principles of international law. We're convinced that only such an approach meets the core interests of Russians and Costa Ricans that traditionally have mutual affinity and their aspiration to having cultural, educational, tourist exchanges that enrich our countries and peoples. From the 14th to 19th of May this year, Kazan will host the 8th Young Diplomats Forum of the OIC. Traditionally, within the 15th International Economic Forum, Russia Islamic World, Kazan Forum 2024. This Young Diplomats Forum is a unique discussion platform for a young staff of foreign ministries together with well-known public figures, diplomats, officials, experts, and businessmen. This platform was built on the principles of the so-called horizontal diplomacy. The goal of the forum is to advance foreign political interests of Russia. What are the main tasks? That is to develop bilateral and multilateral economic ties between member states, establishing trust-based contacts between young colleagues that will shape the foreign political agenda of their states.
And the introductory statement will be made by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia, Sergei Lavrov. The forum is held annually from 2016, and about 250 young diplomats from more than 35 OIC countries took part. The main topic will be diplomacy of the new multipolar world, and discussions will focus on new international security architecture, as well as aspects of work on the ground of young professionals, and there will be also issues related to technological and humanitarian diplomacy. Experts from 23 OIC countries will take part, as the issue of joining the International Association of Young Diplomats and a meeting of the Kazan Diplomatic Club, as well as the participation of students of Kazan Federal University. The forum is organized by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia and the authorities of the Republic of Tatarstan. One more interesting humanitarian news. From the 25th to the 26th of May, the All-Russian Sabantuy will take place in the city of Sibai. The participants are representatives of federal and regional institutions, investors, experts take part, renowned public figures, and it is organized by the Republic of Bashkortostan with the Agency of Strategic Initiatives. More than 20 sessions are planned on the development of tourist infrastructure in Trans-Urals, as well as public-private partnership, capacity building in personnel, and the Republic of Uzbekistan, its delegation, will participate, and we call upon media representatives to take part in the coverage of this event. We will post the relevant link in the text version of the briefing. What I have mentioned at the beginning, the topic of this recently, it has been the great victory, of course. But there is one more date marked today on the 8th of May. In the context of these problems, 75 years ago, on the 8th of May 1949, in Treptower Park in Berlin, the Warrior Liberator Monument was erected. It was in memory of, just think about it, 22,000 Soviet soldiers who died in the capture of the capital of Nazi Germany. And in the war grave, about 7,000 Soviet soldiers have been buried. The work on the monuments was started in 1946. It was being erected during 3 years. The architect is Yakov Belopolsky, and the sculptor is Evgeny Vuchetich. The monument weighs about 70 tons. It was cast in Leningrad, and it was shipped to Berlin in parts. German sculptors, stonemasons, and workers also took part in the construction. The memorial was inaugurated on the 8th of May 1949 in the Treptower Park, very much beloved by the citizens. And that year, the Soviet military command handed over the maintenance and care of the burial site to the Berlin magistrate. The warrior has a sword in his hand that cut the Nazi swastika. On the other hand, he holds a rescued German girl, and the prototype of the soldier was the standard bearer of the 220th Guards Rifle Regiment, Sergeant Nikolai Masalov. Risking his life, he took a 3-year-old German girl out of the crossfire during the street battles in Berlin on the 30th of April 1945. Before the monument is a field with mass graves and sculptures of kneeling soldiers. There are inscriptions in 2 languages: eternal glory to the soldiers of the Soviet army who gave their lives in the struggle for the liberation of mankind. It's not just a place of mournful remembrance, but a symbol of the heroism of the Red Army. Soldiers who gave their lives to defeat the Nazi regime. I would remind that they gave their lives for the people, the future generations for whom they sacrificed that, regardless of civilians, of their country, of their gender, of their race, nationality. They just fought for the future, for the civilization, against the evil, for the good, for the light against the darkness. The memorial is also a warning to the present generations and the future generations that the mankind must firmly learn the most terrible lesson of the 20th century and not allow the tragedy to be repeated. It's especially relevant now, when Europe has declared war on historical truth. Purposefully demolishing and destroying the monuments to the Soviet soldiers and their soldiers as well, by trying to desecrate the mass graves. Unfortunately, the Warrior Liberator Memorial has also become a victim of Russophobia. Just think, in April 2022, the monument was twice desecrated by vandals who smeared it with red paint and covered it with anti-Russian inscriptions. In their fairy tales, in their historical records, regardless of time, place, geography, there is often a phrase appearing. If some monument, temple or some burial site is destroyed, trouble is to come, will come. Wars will begin, your houses will be destroyed and so on. It's about today, it's about the European continent. Just no one understood. No one could think that it would be the indicator, those monuments. There will be that test, the signal that the world is facing another horrible event, and it has been prepared by itself. When they started to destroy those monuments, our country said that trouble is to come. they're not just protected by multilateral and bilateral agreements and international rights. It's contrary to different resolutions, proclamations, declarations adopted within different international bodies. It's not just our predecessors there. The monuments were erected in order to preserve the historical memory and avoid the mistakes that could lead to their repetition. Someone has heard and someone has not. But in one way or another, take care of the monuments. And there is a special map by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs together with the Historical Society where all the monuments that exist now and have been and have not been preserved. I'm talking not only about the monuments but about the graves, the memorial, the thematic sculptures and the inscriptions. It could be a desire of the Western states to conceal the memory of the Second World War, as noted by our president, and they are just the same soldiers, the Red Army soldiers who died during the liberation of Europe from Nazism, and now these monuments are being demolished. It's about the mistakes that should not be repeated by the humankind, and of those events, those memorials, monuments have to remind. And one more quote that is a testimony of the heroic feats of our predecessors, of their heroic deeds. And it's about warning, it's about not allowing just horrible events that were experienced by the humankind in the past. And one more example of the culture of cancellation by the Western capitals. In Germany, they prohibited to use Soviet symbols to demonstrate flags, symbols in Treptower Park, in Pankov, Tiergarten, and on the adjacent territories. And they also prohibited songs sung by the Red Army soldiers when they liberated Berlin from brown plague. These are the lessons. Just learn. Well, it's about a democracy when everything is allowed, and after that many things are not allowed, actually. It's not about the laws like that. It's about such a game, very horrible and dangerous. The military songs of those years, very well known to all of us, that cause tears in the eyes of veterans and the victims of concentration camps. When the Terrorism choir visited Berlin and other countries, for example Israel, the CIS countries, veterans and concentration camps victims, primarily those who were children in concentration camps, and they just have those marks with numbers. You understand what that is. They lived through all those horrors, and in 80 years they saw that reminder on their hand about the stolen childhood. The Terrorism choir has sung a lot and sings different songs. What did they ask for? What do you think? Those who have lived through the horrors of Nazism, they ask the victory songs, the military songs. And now they are denied. It is them who are denied in Germany to sing and to hear and to turn on those songs. Even more humiliatory is the ban to wear. It's just impossible to talk about all that. It's just shameful. It's one of the most shameful pages in the history of Germany for its entire history. They think that the Third Reich is a shameful page, but it's even more shameful, I would say. Because back then, many people are influenced by Goebbels' propaganda. And they were convinced that it was allegedly the true position, the truth of history. But back then it was just impossible to distinguish where was the truth, where was the lie, where was the evil and the good. Now the choice of Germany is even more criminal than the choice made 80 years ago. You just cannot imagine about the Georgian ribbon, what they have invented. It is allowed in Germany to use the colors of the Georgian ribbon and the Russian flag in wreaths and flowers for laying at the memorials. You just need to be animals to think about that. It's just interesting for me. The symbol of the Holocaust is the yellow Star of David. Is everything okay in Germany with that? Or there are also experiments? Have they not invented that David's star could offend, from the point of view of the Sikh liberal democratic conscience, the feeling of the Nazi supporters, who are multiple on the territory of Germany now? Has something like that not appeared? It's only with regard to the symbols of liberators. So where are those anti-Nazi organizations in Europe? The organizations who think that the Holocaust memory preservation is their task. Because where are they? Why are they not active? Because it was their symbols. With those symbols, they took the Holocaust victims, they saved them, and now they just shamefully keep silent. In sharing the common victory and just concealing other things as useless. What is now happening in Germany, with the support of the German authorities, is primarily humiliating the German people. It's humiliating the memory of those who have asked to preserve the memory of those times. We condemn such a sacrilegious decision of the Berlin authorities and call for its cancellation as unlawful, anti-humane, anti-scientific, anti-historical and criminal. We call for a halt to rewriting of history. It cannot be rewritten. It has already happened in your German history. They have tried to rewrite the entire nation, and the price was very high. Now about the Victory Day, we will commemorate as it should be commemorated. It's a happy holiday in celebrating the great victory. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs participates in various events in celebration of the Victory Day. Despite attempts of some countries to create obstacles or to ban the celebration, Our diplomats organize events in various countries around the world. Those were in 2024 27,000 sites across Russia and 200 sites abroad. The Garden of Memory, annual planting of trees, and the event was attended by representatives from 35 countries.
Throughout the 5 years, the memory gardens were planted in over 50 countries. The international campaign, the Memory Flame, will be attended by 14 countries. Part of the inextinguishable flame will be moved to the countries of Europe, Asia, Africa, including Belarus, Algeria, Cyprus, Azerbaijan, Serbia, Germany. I would clarify the list of countries in order not to deceive you. I said that America is also involved, but I will clarify that. That is a reminder of the importance of joint effort to preserve the historical truth. Athletes and artists and volunteers will take the flame from the Alexander Garden. Volunteers abroad will provide such St. George ribbons to 35 countries. These ribbons will be given out at 7,000 sites, including within the polar circle. I often hear, isn't that too much? Not at all. It would be too much should there be no counteraction. And that is what is happening, the rewriting of textbooks, preparation of atrocious movies that were presented as documentaries, and deleting any information whatsoever on the role of Soviet Union, of the Soviet people, on the key role in the history, and deleting its role in the history of World War II. That's not too much. Those who can will make a choice what format he should choose. Those who wish could invite family members and friends to attend. There are a great number of campaigns that could be chosen given the current situation. Certainly, what we wanted to have is, maybe more feedback, maybe more initiative, so that it could be made sincerely. We understand that for decades they've been working on the memory of people. People were indoctrinated for many years at a legislative level. Some countries even made it not possible to use the victory insignia or even to carry out some events, moving as far as banning songs, or even mentioning these events in the genuine historical context. That means that we're not doing too much. Within the Victory Windows campaign, in many countries of the world, windows and fronts of buildings are decorated. Russian diplomats, our compatriots in Albania, Bulgaria, Hungary, Egypt, India, Israel, Uruguay, and Japan participated in these patriotic campaigns. Were it not for these campaigns, everybody would forget about that. If we didn't fight for every memorial, if we didn't reach out to citizens, volunteers, and diplomats, NGOs, should they not focus on this? Were it not for the volunteers' activities to preserve the monuments, even during World War II, people were concealed, were hidden from fascists, but currently memorials are being hidden. They try to find a different place for them. Sometimes they pay and they buy the territory in order to organize a new memorial. Should this hadn't happened, then nobody would remember that many of our compatriots will take to the streets tomorrow during the Victory Day to honor the heroes of the Great Patriotic War during the Immortal Regiment traditional march. With the wartime songs, the participants brought to the streets the photos of victorious heroes. In many countries of the globe, they defeated Hitler Germany and liberated the world from fascism. This year, in many countries of the world, the Immortal Regiment will be online. This will allow us to make a contribution to preserving historical legacy. Despite the counteraction by unfriendly states, Russian diplomats and compatriots are paying tribute to the fallen fighters and honor veterans that liberated the world from Nazism. On May the 8th and 9th, in many parts of the globe, in Abkhazia, Azerbaijan, South Ossetia, and many other states, there will be ceremonies of wreath laying to the tombs of the unknown soldiers, to the memorials of fallen Soviet soldiers, prisoners of wars, and to civilians. There will be festivities and concerts. The staff of territorial bodies, foreign ministries, missions in Russian regions will also attend festivities. On May 9th, Foreign Minister's staff will lay wreath to the memorials of Eternal Flame and tombs of the unknown soldiers. With the help of our offices in regional state institutions, there will be lectures carried out on confronting glorification of Nazism. There will be an international campaign reading to kids on the Great Patriotic War, the contest of children drawings, and the Patriotic Memorial Campaign, the Memory Wall. The Foreign Ministry's office in St. Petersburg organizes the March of Consular Corps of friendly states. The employees of Russian ministry in Samara attended the International Anti-Fascist Forum, Guitars on Duty, that brought together public activists and musicians from 11 countries. Representatives of foreign ministry in Simferopol, together with local authorities, attended the video conference together with Tehran. People all over the globe show enormous interest to history and historical truth. We see that in social networks where we are covering broadly all the initiatives and projects. We publish the materials of our embassies, consulate generals, the footage of celebrations on May 9th, and there will be a whole gamut of them tomorrow. In the run-up to the victory, a great deal of attention is paid to taking care of the memorials. You can get more detailed information from our posts on Telegram, Odnoklasniki, VK, as well as official accounts of Russian Foreign Ministry in foreign languages. Please keep following our accounts, and all the messages have the hashtags hashtag victory 79 or pobeda 79. And I would like to say a few words on the badges of honor provided in the United States. A special attention in the run-up to the Victory Day is paid by Russian diplomats to supporting and honoring veterans that live abroad. That is a work that's been ongoing every day, not just one day a year. One of the key campaigns is to award badges of honor to mark the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Leningrad from fascist siege. 280 badges were awarded by the Russian embassy, consulate generals, through Russian diaspora or veteran organizations. The diplomats wanted to reach out to every veteran. They used consular field sessions in Colorado and California. They engaged compatriots from the states of Illinois, Pennsylvania, Florida. The diplomats of embassy and military attaché office visited personally 5 siege survivors in Washington in their homes and hospitals. They provided the gift baskets with Russian gifts. Many were truly moved to tears. They remembered their homeland. Staff of the Houston Consulate General provided badges to those living in Texas. On April 19th, there was the celebration, the reception in New York. The news on this work was also reached out to veterans in other states, namely Washington, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Missouri, Maryland, New Jersey, Ohio, Oregon. These events are carried out in many countries, and they show that is a unifying factor for compatriots living abroad, and they bind us all with ties that cannot be severed. Many ask me, is it too much? And I say, well, this is the law of life. Veterans that witnessed these events firsthand, the victims, they go away, they pass away, and after that, it will be a shame for us if we don't make their life right now decent, living up to their feet. That is not too much. Most important thing, ask them questions, read their memoirs, listen to their response to what is happening. It is the most important thing. We can have our own opinion, but I believe that their opinion is invaluable. With that, I'm ready to take a question. The International Life magazine, are you here with us? Hello, happy Victory Day. Happy Victory Day to you. A few questions. Recently, the Germany Foreign Ministry said that it recalled its ambassador to Russia for consultations for a week due to alleged Russian cyber attacks. What's your take on that step of the German Foreign Ministry? You know what? Just a track record. On May 3rd, the chargé d'affaires of Germany was summoned of Russia was summoned to the German Foreign Ministry due to the alleged cyber attack on the Social Democratic Party of Germany that happened back in 2023. As you understand, no evidence was provided. It was made in the Anglo-Saxon traditions of highly likely. These were groundless accusations. They were refuted. And generally speaking, Berlin regularly capitalizes on this myth of notorious activities of Russian hackers in order to escalate bilateral relations. If I may, let me remind you that back in the day, we had an interagency mechanism with Germany for regular bilateral consultations on cybersecurity. We called to discuss the activities of the so-called Russian hackers during these sessions, as well as all German concerns regarding Russian hacker attacks. And you know what? German experts replied they were not interested in that. They avoided this topic in principle. As a result, the German Foreign Ministry refused to continue this format, and that is self-explanatory. Although Berlin was quite reticent in dealing with eavesdropping by the National Security Agency of the US of German politicians. Does Germany have double standards? For instance, the German Chancellor can be eavesdropped. As for hacker attacks, well, there should be a common standard. We have this common standard. Do they? The recalling of the German ambassador from Moscow is yet another step aimed at fueling anti-Russian mood in Germany that further degrades bilateral relations, and all responsibility lies with the German side. As you have mentioned, there's been gamut of statements within the Western camp regarding the relevant topic. I've already mentioned the claims by the UK, by Germany. A host of other countries made the same. Thanks a lot. Another topical question. How would you comment on the information on possible warrants by the International Criminal Court for Israeli officials and the US response to that? Arrest of whom? Arrest of Israeli officials. Well, for starters, let me say that we have repeatedly gave principled assessments of what is happening in Gaza. I've just said it. Secondly, let us once again recall that we respect the activities of the UN Court of Justice. That is the main legislative body, judicial body in the international system. At the same time, we do not change our stance with regard to the so-called International Criminal Court. This body has nothing to do with the United Nations. It has nothing to do with justice whatsoever. This is our consistent stance. We believe that that is a pseudo-mock court. It has no right to spread its jurisdiction to those countries who do not participate in its statute. This calls for the immunity of senior officials of other countries. As for the potential arrest warrants against Israeli officials, here comes the most interesting thing. Once again, our position of principle does not depend on a case-by-case basis. Our position is based on the crux of the matter. If we're talking about the International Criminal Court, we do not accept this organization, we do not accept its decisions regarding arrest warrants and so on. No matter who we are talking about, our position with regard to this entity has been taking shape for many years, and that's how we treat it. At the same time, everything that is happening around the ICC is a graphic example of the double standards of Western fighters against lawlessness, for democracy, and so on, and their genuine treatment of the international law, the international criminal justice. Let me just provide you an explanation. We have already commented on that, but still, let me delve on that. As expected, the treatment of the US towards the so-called International Criminal Court and the decision of the ICC depends on the political landscape. They immediately warned the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, Karim Khan. 18 months ago, they praised him for anti-Russian decisions. He was making the headlines in their news. They were praising him for the high legal standards. Immediately, Washington warned him that then he and this pseudo ICC will face severe sanctions if The Hague dares make criminal verdict against US allies, and they even made the relevant letter. These were not hints. This was the letter sent by American senators, this black mark. And the Capitol Hill already provided a draft on this matter that envisages personal restrictions against prosecutor, judges, and employees of the ICC, as well as members of families and those people who help them. If they start even an initial investigation of crimes of servicemen and officials of the US and its allies, is it normal? Is it okay to have this situation? I also like that. Biden administration publicly abstains from the direct threats against the ICC, but according to Western media, it made it clear, and it is quoted by American media, that Karim Khan should not dare do this, and that the United States is against any counterproductive steps, as they put it, counterproductive steps against Israel. How come? If you saw this in some kind of a movie, a film, if you read this in a novel, you would say, okay, no, maybe that is something psychedelical, postmodern, maybe it's some kind of an art house. This can't happen in real life, but that is the real life. As you know, the former administration already imposed sanctions on former prosecutor of the ICC, and former office team was also sanctioned. And the investigation halted. What are we talking about? I could understand some kind of a logic. The former administration did not perceive the court, but the current administration follows the course supporting this body.
So we all remember that 2 years ago they just supported Khan frantically and said that it was the height of the legal thought. The same prosecutor, the same instrument, the same people who are now intimidated by the United States. If they just dare revealing documents against the US and their allies, the same will work this time, because it's a citation. The ICC has no legal jurisdiction over the US or any country that has not recognized its authority. End of quote. If the United States recognize that the ICC does not have jurisdiction over some countries, they should react similarly in relation to Russia as well. We are not part of the ICC in any area, but it's a different thing. Why do they think that Russia, something applies to Russia from the ICC decisions? It's just for the legal scholars, such cases, but I personally think that it's for doctors, because Russia has not recognized the ICC jurisdiction. So why does Washington support the arrest warrants of Russian officials against them? And it's just anti-Russian investigation is financed by them. The answer is simple. This structure was especially created for some Western orders and will do only what Washington and Brussels allows it. So as we have already mentioned, everything is mixed up in the White House. Any other questions? Yes, please, one more question. Within the framework of ensuring the global food security, Russia continues its supplies to the countries in need in Africa and Latin America. It's about the development of the initiative to donate Russian mineral fertilizers to African countries. Now, 4 batches of fertilizers have been sent to Malawi, Kenya, Nigeria, and Zimbabwe. It's 110 tons in total. The EU and the authorities of Latvia, Estonia, and Belgium keep detaining a significant part of the illegally arrested Russian products. These are products within the framework of this humanitarian action. They are just stating, and not just stating, they have organized the whole campaign in food security and their illegal sanctions not being covered, not covering Russian food products. But actually it's just something for them to profit, only for them, and to create some favorable conditions for themselves, overcoming competitors. And the most vulnerable countries of the global south suffer. Those countries for whom the collective West just should care. And we aim to continue the work to unblock our fertilizers with their further donation free of charge to those in need. And we hope that efforts will be made by representatives of the UN World Food Programme within the framework of the Russia-UN Memorandum. Such assistance is not free of charge because Russia also pays for the assistance of the UN. And what has been promised should be done, and they have promised to cooperate. Is Ria Novosti with us? Thank you very much. Hello, Madam Zakharova. Congratulations, the great holiday, and we have two questions for you. We have those accusations against Russia, accusations of cyber attacks. How could you comment on that? It just substantiated speculations, and they are fueling that atmosphere before the American elections, and this topic can be discussed within the states, and maybe those statements, multiple statements within the EU, aim at anti-Russian actions, anti-Russian course. Such unsubstantiated statements have been made in Britain, the Czech Republic, Germany. And those insinuations have been already commented by Russian authorities, and those who have allegedly suffered have not used the special communications channels via competent authorities. They just not need that. They have no desire to settle some difficult issues. They just invent them. They just think of them. And the last question, the European Union has plans to shift to low-carbon economy. And now the more impetus is provided to the military course of the EU economy, and the green agenda has been significantly stalled. It's just obvious. The EU countries have been weakened by the policy of the EU. It just not meet that task that has been imposed to it within the framework of the European Green Deal. They have just been deceived by the Americans. They have been deceived by that green agenda. Some of them have been shifted from the development of nuclear energy like Germany. And some of them have been imposed some areas where the EU economy cannot reach the rate of the American economy, that the American economy has just had now reached due to the failures of the EU. The EU cannot just bear the triple strike against that triple blow. It's anti-Russian sanctions, and this green economy will just be a final blow, I think. The European Green Deal targets, the experts are just more skeptical about them. It's not enough elaboration of some green norms, and it will be impossible to achieve climate neutrality by 2050 and ensure the sustainable economic growth. It will be an increase of €1 trillion a year. These are the figures that have been stated by the European Union. But how much do they spend on Ukraine? Just think about that. And the trillions will be spent to the support of the part that will remain from Ukraine with the Western influence. And it's about the difference in the state support of energy, some energy sources in EU countries. And now the priority task of the EU for the coming years is the green economy and preserving its competitiveness. And they need to ensure the privileged access to labor resources not on the territory of the European Union, and the transfer of the cutting-edge EU technologies to the third countries. The EU has begun as preferences in joint multilateral formats that allowed them to democratize their finances, economy, and so on. It was about cutting losses in decades that turned into a monster eating the finances of Western Europeans. It's just a heavy stone. It's just drowning. And the European economy, I think, will never float again. And they're just not ready to abandon their efforts to impose on the global majority of their approaches. They just not cope themselves, but they will keep imposing on others. It's about the mistakes made by Brussels in green agenda. Green agenda has always been a political instrument for the European Union, as they have a chance to lift the economy on at the expense of others, even by undermining the perspectives of economic growth. So, is China Media Corporation with us? Yes, we have two questions. The ceremony of inauguration of Russian president took place, what are your expectations for the new presidential term? To be brief, I have the brightest perspectives, and during the term of Vladimir Putin as president, the presidential term, there are practical results of cooperation. Humanitarian ties are developed. Cooperation between Russia and China is on the basis of mutual respect and equal rights. And in its quality, it's better than the Cold War blocs and does not depend on the global situation and is not against the third countries. And the victory of Vladimir Putin during the elections in Russia, with the figures you all know, with the support or the wide support of the Russian society, including its foreign, its trade dimension, and it's about partnership with China and the successorship of this policy in trade between Moscow and Beijing. His first foreign trip after inauguration will be to China. And the Chinese head of state also chose Russia as his first foreign destination after re-election. So it's a testimony of intensive working contacts and friendship. Without any doubt, in rapid changes in international situation, Russia and China will further counter all the external threats and challenges, and it will allow to together resolve all the issues in bilateral cooperation and global governance. Thank you. And second question. China supports the international peace conference that would be recognized both by Russia and Ukraine, with a discussion of all the peaceful plans. Xi Jinping has recently made such statements, and he underlined that China supports balanced and effective sustainable architecture of security in Europe. How would you comment on his visit to Europe in order to settle the Ukrainian crisis? I think it's about two sovereign countries, and we are not ready to comment on that. It does not require our comment, I think. With regard to Ukraine, Beijing adheres to a well-thought stance regarding the causes of the conflict, and it was reflected in the document published by the Chinese Foreign Ministry on the 24th of February 2023, a document of 12 points on the political and diplomatic settlement of the Ukrainian crisis. And we're grateful to the Chinese government for its determined policy and the lack of participation in the monocentric forums organized by the US is aimed at fueling the war. And Beijing has mentioned that it will support only the events that would involve Russia and the Kiev regime. It would be a key condition of Chinese participation in the events. And we are interested in discussing the peaceful initiatives with China. Is Reuters with us? Yes, hello, Madam Zakharova, we are here. We have a question about the sharp escalation in the Ukrainian rhetoric in a recent week. It's about Britain sending troops and saying that Ukraine could use the supplied weapons for strikes against Russian territory, and the drills with the non-strategic nuclear arms. What could be done in order to de-escalate the situation, in the opinion of Russia? So what are the reasons of these statements by the West? The situation is grave for the Kiev regime on the front line.
The West is further dragging on the situation of the Ukrainian statehood or even Ukrainian citizen. Ukrainian per se, they become the suppliers of cannon fodder among people who are in the territory of Western countries. They need to present it to the Ukrainian society, and they ratchet up this rhetoric. The situation is dire. The people are less and less numerous. I do not know. Maybe they will start drafting kids from kindergarten to send on the front line. It will come as no surprise to me. I understand why Ukraine cared so much about the fate of dolphins, saboteur dolphins. According to the information, these dolphins went to Russia after Crimea reunified with Russia, because currently they are ready to use anything that is movable, even dolphins. And the West just ratchets up this rhetoric. The second thing is the US. That is a great factor for political instability. They have to present new tranches of assistance, and they have to show some kind of a public life. The conferences on pseudo peace formulas of Zelensky are a failure. What should they do? They need to aggravate the rhetorics. The economic indicators are atrocious in European countries as well. What do they need for escalation? Borrell said if they stop funneling weapons to Ukraine, it will take 2 weeks to put an end to that. Here you go, the genuine peace formula voiced by the West. This is the way out of the escalation. Moving on, news.ru, are you here with us? Madam Zakharova, hello. We have 2 questions. The first goes as follows. Currently, there's been aggravated tensions between the US and China, and the US is ratcheting up sanctions against China, including for supporting Russian defense and industrial complex. How would you comment on these sanctions against China? You know, these sanctions against China are imposed by the West, by the US, and this has been going on for a long time, long before the story with our country. They were not that flagrant, and this has to do with the economic growth of China, with the indicators of Chinese economy of the past decades, or the fact that they cannot compete with it. They cannot achieve the same results shown by the Chinese industry and science. That is yet another pretext in order to use non-rivalry, unfair methods to stop China. That is declared by the West itself. Thank you. And the second question In March, Western diplomats harshly criticized our presidential campaign, and recently Brussels, on the eve of the presidential inauguration, advised Western diplomats not to attend this inauguration. However, several ambassadors, including the ones from unfriendly states, visited the inauguration. How would you comment on that? Frankly speaking, first, the invitations were sent to everyone. We did not hide that, to both friendly and unfriendly states. Secondly, we did not follow who visited and who did not participate. Probably somebody has some kind of a statistics. We did not follow that. It is our event in line with the constitutional provisions. This is a celebration for our people, among other things. The people that celebrate the victory of its own candidate. It is an important event for us, first and foremost. Since this is an official event, we gave an opportunity for everyone to attend. Once again, simply because this is a part of an official procedure. As for who attended and who did not participate, probably you can find some information, but this was not the focus of our attention yesterday. And another interesting thing is that you should ask the question to countries and to the peoples of countries who have not attended what they are doing there if they are not implementing their basic function to attend official ceremonies, to develop contacts, to communicate. What are they doing here? Are they engaged in undermining activities? Well, they cannot do that in the scale that they got used to, and it's been happening for some time. Their calls to change the regime, well, that's just funny to think about that, given their aspiration to do bad things to ensure unfair play. Frankly speaking, that's not our priority to follow them. But globally, there is a broad question what they are actually doing here. Okay, clear. Thank you. You know what is also interesting? Those countries who said to their ambassadors not to attend the ceremony, allegedly, well, maybe they have some kind of instructions via Brussels, via NATO, or from the US embassy. It's hard to guess, but if ambassadors from these countries were told yesterday by their governments not to attend the inauguration, I have a question. When these ambassadors are going to be replaced, their successors need to get the relevant documents, and who will provide these documents to them? Who give them legal grounds for implementing their mandate as an ambassador? That is the head of our state. What are they going to do in this case? Will they not attend this ceremony in the Kremlin, or will there be some new diplomatic ceremonies invented because the Convention on Diplomatic Relations was not changed? How are they going to plan to have their replacements? All these questions should be asked by their journalists, by their society, by the civil society, by their government. What are they expecting? Since you have no further questions, Bharat Tak, India, are you here with us? India, Bharat Tak.
I just want to say that I have a question regarding an article published by Washington Post. Am I visible?
Да-да-да, я слушаю вас.
I can hear you. Go on.
So, Washington Post quoted that India is a part of expanding roster of countries employing tactics previously associated with China, Russia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and other repressive regimes. It is a trend fueled by factors ranging from surging strains of nationalism and authoritarianism to the spread of social media and spyware that both empower and endanger dissident groups. So how does Russia see the allegation against Indian officials in a foiled assassination plot on foreign soil? Recently, American news outlet Washington Post claimed that India is trying to do what Russia and Saudi does against their enemy.
Вы знаете, я хотела бы сказать, что
You know what? I can say that Washington should use the term repressive regime and everything that you quoted regarding Washington, with regard to Washington, because it is hard to imagine more repressive regime than Washington in international and national affairs. With regard to your question in particular, according to our information, so far Washington has not given so far any credible information or evidence that Indian citizens are involved in the preparation of killing of some Panoon. As for the speculations, since there is no evidence, they are not acceptable. Regular groundless accusations by the US against New Delhi, and we see that they not only accuse groundlessly New Delhi, but also other states in violating religious freedoms, reflects the fact that the US simply does not understand the national mindset and the historical context of the development of the Indian state, and they are not respecting India as a state. And we believe that it stems from the neo-colonial mindset, the colonial mindset during the times of slavery and imperialism. And by the way, it has to do not only with India. And the reason is that they try to unbalance the domestic political situation in India in order to make it harder to have the general parliamentary election. And that is part of the meddling into India's domestic affairs.
Indian External Affairs Ministry spokesperson said that America is trying to influence the general elections happening in India. And as we know that Russian leaders are in India to see how India is conducting elections. So how do you see that? Is America really trying to influence that Indian general election?
да, я только что сказала.
Yes, that's what I've just said. Naturally, that is the desire to stand in the way to impede the general parliamentary election in India, and that is done by the US. That is a part of a campaign to interfere into domestic affairs of India. That is something that I have just said. Thank you.
С нами ли
The Moscow Post, are you here with us? Hello. We have one question, but before that, happy Victory Day. It is so important to us. Yes, and happy Victory Day to you. Proposal to ceasefire that was proposed by Hamas was agreed upon, and what are the prospects for the implementation of the UN Security Council on the territorial disengagement between Palestine and Israel? I've already answered that question during my introductory remarks. I have nothing to add, but I will clarify it with my experts. Thank you. Moving on, Report Agency. Are you here with us? Report Agency. Well, in this case, Baku TV. Hello, Madam Zakharova. Baku TV.ru. The first question, the date for the meeting of Azerbaijan and Armenia has been announced in Almaty. What are your expectations? We welcome this meeting on May 10th, and we are ready to facilitate Azerbaijan-Armenia normalization. On April 22nd, Moscow hosted negotiations between President of Russia, Azerbaijan, and today our leader will have a meeting with the Armenian Prime Minister in order to ensure peace, stability, and security in South Caucasus. And the second question, congratulations to all of you on the Victory Day on May 9th. We also celebrated in our republic. As far as I know, I received a brooch, handmade brooch with Russian flag from someone in Baku, and we kept on this tradition. And our staff of information ministry created this brooch as a symbol of victory. You see, we keep on these best traditions, including when it comes to handicraft. This is the act of humanitarian cooperation. Our sincere appreciation goes to our predecessors, our great-grandfathers, for their contribution in the victory. All the best wishes to all the veterans, to all those who were involved or who preserved the memory and will celebrate tomorrow this great day in Azerbaijan and Armenia, in the post-Soviet space, without distinguishing any country in particular. Congratulations to all of you. Thank you for reminding us all about that. Thanks a lot. On this bright note, I do not wish to go back to something bad. Yet, unfortunately, not everywhere in the post-Soviet space, the successes of those who fought against Nazism preserved the memory of our heroes. Indeed, let us stop on this positive note. There are a lot of bad examples that we've mentioned, but there are much more examples of us joining hands, of our efforts despite the destruction that we see, in order to preserve historical truth, historical memory on the Great Patriotic War. Let us be guided by the best examples. And I believe that this is the path not only to preserve a historical memory and the memory of the great achievements of our peoples, it is the way to preserve everything humane that was preserved by our civilization. Congratulations to all of you on the Victory Day, May the 9th. I wish everyone prosperity. I wish you celebrate tomorrow's holiday with open heart to remember your predecessors, your family who participated on the front line, in the home front, or being the children after the war who suffered a lot. Sing the victory songs, watch the parade in the Red Square and worldwide, participate in the Immortal Regiment in person or online, other campaigns, and most importantly, bring this festivity that will come tomorrow, bring it to your life the year, for the whole year. The next year is an anniversary year, and we need to prepare for that for the next 365 years. Just like the wars were waging for the past year that resulted in our victory 80 years ago. They didn't know whether this year would be the last one. They didn't know whether this will be the last year for them or for others. But we have done it, and we will start the historical marathon tomorrow. It should result in a common ground, a common point, the 80th anniversary